Hello and welcome to another electronic session of the electronic Delphi Economic Forum. I'm here with Nicholas Negroponte and we'll try to explore some of what the future has with us in the area of technology. And looking at the title of the session, a talk that Nicholas gave 3 years back at MIT came immediately to my mind. At that talk, he coined the phrase that biotech is the new digital. And I would like to start this session today by asking him to comment on that and see how that has evolved in the past 3 years.
When I say biotech is the new digital, I mean it in two ways. One is it's going to really change the future. You think we've had big changes because of the digital world. You've seen nothing. The really big changes ahead are very in biotech. But the other reason I say it is that we have been able, as humans, to work at smaller and smaller and smaller physical scales. And what that means when you get really small is you're down at the levels that nature works at. And even you can go below those. And there's an interesting coincidence that most people don't know about, and that is that the first thesis on nanotech was written at the MIT Media Lab by a PhD student named Eric Drexler. And one of the reasons he did it at the Media Lab, which is, if I may say, the raison d'etre of the whole lab, is that nobody else wanted to do it. He was refused every place else. And we embraced him. He did his thesis. He went off. He practiced. He created a field, and it's commonly accepted. Now, the same in the biotech world has been happening also at the Media Lab. Now, when I founded the Media Lab, I thought that I could predict everything we'd do, and that everything we would do would be somewhat related to design. That it was really a very synthetic spirit to the lab. It was about making things. It was coming in part from my own background in architecture, but also the other people who initially founded the lab had a design background as well. But none of us, not one person, 35 years ago, thought that we would be designing mice today. We have a mouse design program. And the people working on mouse design are doing it for all sorts of reasons. In one particular case, it's to get the mice to have the genetic properties to kill the ticks that lead to Lyme disease. So it's a particular application, but what's interesting is designing mice.
I hear these things. I mean, I joined the lab 25 years ago to work on computing, and always I feel a little bit like a dinosaur, since I'm not coding in DNA yet. But what makes me feel particularly good about what I do is that computing is the substrate that enables a lot of this progress. We wouldn't do it without computing. And when people think of nanotechnology, the first thing that comes to mind is shrinking silicon transistors. Things that bring, they don't think about modifying matter as much programmatically yet, but this is essentially what is coming to our future, programming everything. A lot of people are using the catchphrase that software is eating everything. Well, software is essentially expanding. What we think about software seems to have a much broader application into the natural world. We are always trying to merge the natural and the artificial. Some people think that as a very scary thing. A good example is what happened over the last 3-4 years, the last few years, when it came to artificial intelligence and the progress, quote unquote, that has happened over there. A lot of people see it antagonistically. I see it as completely different capabilities. I see it as a merging, again, of the natural and the artificial. But there is when it comes to computing, there is a very large theme that has emerged, not in the last 3 years, in the past decade, I think. And it's not as much miniaturization anymore. It's not as much as how many transistors we can fit into a specific area, but rather it is how much we can do with a specific amount of energy. It seems that energy is the limiting factor to a lot of the things that we are doing. Yes.
Before you go to energy, let's go back quickly to some of the roots of artificial intelligence, because they do lead up to the subject of energy. But it's important to remember that the term artificial intelligence was coined in the summer of 1956. A special project had been created, and the name was artificial intelligence, given by Marvin Minsky, among others. There were very few people involved. And when the Media Lab was founded, Marvin joined the founding of the Media Lab and brought with him years of having considered and done work in artificial intelligence. And because I was a personal friend, I was not so much his student and he wasn't really my mentor, but he was a personal friend, I got to see Marvin in his daily life with all of the most amazing scientists of the era passing through his home for lunch or dinner. And in those rare moments, what did they talk about? What did they discuss in the 70s and early 80s and even late 60s? What were they talking about when they talked about artificial intelligence? They didn't talk about self-driving cars. They didn't talk about big data. They talked about humor. They talked about music. They asked questions like, why does the mind appreciate music? What makes something funny? And I felt at the time those were pretty profound questions, but most people in the world didn't appreciate them. And artificial intelligence as a field, insofar as you could call it that, drifted more towards robotics, self-driving cars, problems that Marvin Minsky would have called the easy problems. Now, something happened about 10 years ago, which they hadn't anticipated. The founders of the field hadn't really thought about collective intelligence. that you could actually create through telecommunications a collective intelligence that was far more powerful than any one of the individuals in the system. And so it's only been in the past 3 years, maybe 3.5, that it's come into daily parlance, that people refer to AI. They wouldn't have known what it was 3 years ago. And the reason I know that is that Marvin Minsky died a little over 3 years ago, and he never got to see it. He was accused by many people of being a charlatan. People referred to artificial intelligence as an oxymoron. But he pushed it, and through people like Marvin and Marvin's students and Marvin's students, it is now by far the most exciting field or subfield of computer science.
It is, however, even in the existing forms of, collective superintelligence that we have, we still haven't been able to address the fundamental questions. I mean, symbolic thinking, humor, ethics, all of these things are still 20 years away, as they were since the inception of the field. But what has become completely obvious is that with the existing approaches and the existing technology that we have, Marvin's student Kurzweil's, for example, theory about the singularity, we are not gonna have an emergence of intelligence just because we build something extremely complex, just because there is not enough energy to build something as complex as the human brain using silicon at this point. So energy seems to be the recurring theme here. We have to look into biological computing maybe for the future, because the human brain seems to be extremely efficient, being the very, very complex machine that it is. So we live in an era that it's a strange situation that we are in right now because of COVID-19. We kept forgetting what the biggest problems were before we went into COVID-19. Everybody was concerned, and hopefully they are still concerned about what happens with the climate and human-induced changes in the planet's equilibrium. Again, there is a huge move towards renewable energy. Some people think that this is the way that's going to get us where we need to be by 2050, if you think that that's the milestone. But it doesn't seem that we are getting there fast enough, as we didn't with AI in the past. We are not getting there with energy either. We are doing progress, but we are not getting there.
Well, one of the reasons, Michalis, we're not getting there, I think most people have a very wrong-minded approach to climate change and energy. Quite frankly, this is a bit extreme, but it's almost correct. Renewables will not get us there. Renewables may be a distraction, especially some of the bio-renewables where we're burning wood chips. That's ridiculous. And while there's a place for solar panel and there's a place for wind, their energy density, this is the most important concept, is energy density. And if we need energy, and I believe we need 5 times more than we currently use to bring people out of poverty, to take slums and convert them to redo. For mankind, we can't look at what we consume today. Because right now, 80% of energy is consumed by 20% of the people. So if we really do need 5 times more, then whether you and I save 20% by conserving, by having a smaller footprint, while that's nice at certain levels, it doesn't get you there. You really need to think of the CO2 generated by all means of production. And if we were perfectly green tomorrow, 0 CO2, no emissions, we still have to take out at least 500 gigatons of CO2 that's in the air at the moment. So being carbon neutral is a fundamentally stupid concept. You've got to be carbon negative, not carbon neutral. Secondly, you can't wait to 2050. Doing by 2050. When I hear people saying we're going to be carbon neutral by 2050, I want to get sick. Because you can't wait till then. And also, as I said, you have to be carbon negative. And there's only one way to do that. It's nuclear. So just think about it this way. When people converted from wood to coal, and the locomotive only needed 1 car of coal versus 2 cars of wood, because coal is double the energy density of wood. Nuclear is 3 million times the energy of coal. Just on the basis of energy density, we have to include it much more vigorously in our future than people have. And there's no way around that. And you can build windmills and you can build more solar panels, but you're not going to get there without a strong nuclear presence. And I don't mean nuclear power plants. I mean thousands and thousands of small ones.
How do we address the fears, though, at this point? And how do we, is this the best solution moving forward? Is this a realistic solution moving forward, assuming handling of nuclear waste, as opposed to, moving to the next step, fusion?
Well, there are three fears, none of which might be enough to pause, but all three together do give people pause. There's the fear of nuclear proliferation, that if we do this, we can turn them into bombs. There's the fear of safety in the sense of a meltdown and an explosion. And then there's the fear of the waste. And if you look at all of those fears together, and you look at contemporary, so-called Generation 3 and Generation 4 nuclear solutions, which are much more modular, they're built in factories, it doesn't have the properties that we knew in Generation 1 and 2, they are much safer. Can I say perfectly safe? Almost. Do they have waste? No, the new ones use their own waste. And can you have proliferation? Well, not if you use low-grade uranium or thorium or some other materials. So in all those dimensions, it's gotten better, better, and better. And then people say, yes, but Fukushima happened. How many people died in Fukushima from nuclear? The answer is 0. Did people know they had designed it badly? Yes. Were there warnings that they should build a higher seawall? Yes. So there are accidents, but so far in the entire history, including Chernobyl that was badly designed without an outer casing, 57 people have died. Compare that to 3 million a year who die from coal. So we just have to change our attitude and document much, much better than we have why it is safer, why proliferation has changed, and why there won't be a meltdown in the sense that if there's a problem, people just walk away and it turns off on its own.
So it's a matter of resources also. I mean, doing the certification and the testing and the research at this point, we had at MIT a variety of examples that didn't really go anywhere because I think mostly because we passed them over to the private sector too early. I mean, the capital requirements for energy research are much more what, the Silicon Valley VC model is willing or able to provide. The question becomes, at this point, given that there is always a limit in funds, is it more realistic to pursue this path, or should we go full force on fusion again? At this point, as a bet.
Let me, there's always the futurist in me who feels you have to bet on the future, which is certainly fusion. Fusion is the future. And it's much closer than it's been, and there are people working on it. But if you backtrack to fission for a moment and ask yourself, who are the leaders? Who is doing the most advanced work in fission? And the answer is the Russians and the Chinese. Now, why? Why are the Russians and the Chinese doing all this advanced work and the United States falling way behind and other countries way behind? And the answer is just what you said a few moments ago. The answer is that they are state-owned companies. And those state-owned companies do the work in nuclear fission for different reasons. They don't have to break even economically. The truth is, nor do we. This is an existential issue. This is something about, will the world exist for your grandchildren? Period. And there is no price on that. And even if nuclear power costs twice as much, we should be using it. So looking for economic models is, quite frankly, a waste of time. And when we move toward fusion, and we don't know how advanced the Chinese are or how advanced the Russians are, but we do know the projects that are going around are happening in the United States and the UK, which are the two most active in this area. They're interesting, they're good. Most recently, the year 2025 is suggested by one. It happens to be an MIT spin-out called Commonwealth Fusion. I've never heard anybody propose 2025 as a time when a fusion system would be online on the grid. And fusion has no chain reaction. Fusion has no waste. And fusion has nothing that is in any way weaponizable. It's not part of the same physics. And so the fusion reactors which will be relatively big. They'll be the size of your living room at smallest, size of a two-story building, perhaps more commonly. It's very important because that is the Holy Grail. And it's very good. It doesn't run out of fuel, really.
Yeah, the main issue, I mean, to an engineer, the main issue is that on one side you have something that works and you know how to make it work now. And on the other hand, you have something that will require a ton of investment, will require immense international cooperation. This is at the end an existential threat, and addressing an existential threat. And all of that in an era where it seems that international cooperation is backtracking at this point in time. If there is something hopeful about this whole COVID-19 mess, is that, you know, people did seem to throw away economic models when it comes to existential issues. And, you know, a lot of countries, the countries that have successfully addressed the crisis, at least at its first stage, were the ones that didn't really worry too much about the economy. And they moved on early. This is probably a good thing to keep in mind for the climate crisis. If you start to count bodies, you are too late. You probably miss your opportunity to address it early on. But we see that there is an increasing tribalism, there is an increasing antagonism, mostly between the US and China at this point in time as the main players in the economy and the technology. The Europeans seem to not being able to get their collective act together at this point. So how do you think this sort of throws us back, doesn't it?
Well, the key word perhaps in your question is us, because the United States is behaving so badly, it's embarrassing. It is really embarrassing, because if there were any time in the history of the world where countries should be collaborating, and think about it this way. Let's imagine that you are the most powerful economy, and let's imagine that you are in some decline. I mean, I don't want to be too dramatic, but you're no longer the most powerful in everything. And the second most powerful economy seems to be on the rise. They're in rough numbers 4 times our population. It would seem to me that now is the time to collaborate, that the United States and China should get together and collaborate on everything. And the fact that there is a fight going on, or even a pretense of a fight, is shameful. Absolutely shameful. And in our world, Michali's, in your world and my world, the United States treatment of Huawei as a specific example is unbelievable. It's unheard of. Huawei is a very interesting, great company doing lots of advanced research. We want to collaborate, but we couldn't. The government, the US government, told MIT to stop doing Huawei. And they even told you, Michālis Blétsas, to take the Huawei equipment out of the building. So that's crazy stuff. And the reason it's crazy stuff is that Huawei's research budget is toward the National Science Foundation of the United States. Think of it. The National Science Foundation does lots of things in all branches of science. Our funding of all of that through National Science Foundation is smaller than what Huawei is putting towards telecommunications, vision, chips, AI, all of that. So who should be working with whom? And when people say we've been stealing intellectual property or they've been stealing ours, you can go back and find examples and so on. The truth is, we all did it. But today, nobody steals anything from anybody, hope from the Chinese, because they're way ahead of us in many, many areas, the ones that you and I work in.
So, yes, I think that we are taking a temporary step back for the next few years, and we have to reverse that, hopefully with a more reasonable resident at the White House. That might change. In the meantime, the science community has to push against this tribalism, because the problems that we have to address are not going to be addressed in a local environment. Hopefully people will start realizing the scale of the issues much better. Unfortunately, short term, we don't see good signs. Everybody thinks that, when a problem gets people forget that all the fundamental progress of the past century was, funded by government research, and then it passed on to the private sector. I don't think people realize that. And, today we had, SpaceX reaching putting astronauts on the International Space Station, and lots of people will come out and say, oh, see, we were right, forgetting how much research was done and how much effort was put in before, at a point where this thing was literally a moonshot. And hopefully we will see that, we all build upon each other's accomplishments. And when you have international problems, this has to happen at an international level. What happens with Huawei, it's kind of funny, given that most of the equipment that we all use, it's manufactured in China anyway. But that's a different discussion. For our digital future, we need more energy and more collaboration. And with that, we are going to end. Thank you very much.
Thank you.